Hello, my beautiful friends. It is an amazing morning and quite early for us here. And we're warming up the vocal cords as the tubes themselves connect themselves all across the fruited plain of the interwebs. Let's make sure they're working before we jump into the business that we have to attend to. And there's some good stuff cooking today. I know we just had a show last night. We're waking up this morning. We're here early. We're wondering, is there anything even left to talk about since we covered it all yesterday? Well, there is. There's some good stuff. And so we are early today because your boy has a conference. I'll be heading out in about an hour and 15 minutes, going all day, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. It's going to be amazing. So a lot of awesome people will be there, and we're doing a dinner and all the things. So we'll be out of pocket, but we wanted to make sure we squeezed in a live stream here this morning before we took off for the day. And we're glad we did because there's awesome business to attend to. Of course, we had the debate with Kari Lake. Let me give you a preview of what we're talking about before we zoom in on it, because we do have some filings we'll be reading today that I'm excited about. But we also had the debate last night with Kari Lake and Ruben Gallego here in Arizona, and it was capturing a lot of eyeballs on X and elsewhere. And you know it didn't go well for their side when the Arizona Republic, when our news media here, our local people, when they post stuff like this, saying that the Ruben debate was awful TV that taught us nothing, right? Okay. So your candidate didn't have a tremendous victory, so you're upset about it. All right. So that's how you know it didn't go their way. I've got a bunch of clips. Kari Lake is good at this, obviously. She's very skilled on camera, and she let it shine last night. So we'll poke around. I've got a bunch of those clips queued up, and then we're zooming in a little bit on Gallego. We'll save all that for the end and get there in time. But yesterday on the program, we talked about Fulton County and how Fulton County was really fighting to have these monitors installed. And the State Board of Elections there in Georgia passed a subpoena for the clerk of Fulton County to deliver documents and said somebody from Fulton County better bring their booty back over here and explain to us why they're not giving us documents. And they wanted a monitor, or actually a whole group of monitors, to monitor what's going on in Fulton, because we had some pretty big problems in Fulton County in 2020. Well, now we know that the Fulton County Board is suing the state of Georgia. They filed a complaint for declaratory and injunctive relief. And so this is from Fannyland, Fulton County. And we'll read through it. We'll see what their argument is for why they shouldn't have their monitors that they agreed to in. Now, they're saying that these are basically the bad monitors, right? We don't want your monitors. We want our monitors. And the question is, why are they so concerned with having people monitor the elections in Georgia? Well, we know why. Because they're cheaters. And so we're excited about getting into that. There was also some Georgia news from this judge. You remember him? He was from the YSL trial for a little while until he got, I forgot I'm not logged in over here. He was caught in a bunch of conflict in the YSL trial, and now he has dismissed a lawsuit. They're trying to go after the Republicans on the Board of Elections that we listened to yesterday. They're trying to go after them, and we'll read through that article because the judge is not going to allow it to happen, which of course is very good news. Then I definitely want to talk about what's happening in Arizona. There's an organization called the America First Policy Institute, which had a major victory that is important to share. They posted an update October 8th saying that there was a significant win in Arizona federal courts, a big win for election integrity and free speech. And this is the same thing that we've been talking about here for a long time. The secretaries of states of various states change the election manuals, right? Arizona has one, the Arizona Election Procedures Manual, the EPM. So they're not changing the laws because they did that in 2020 and everybody's keen on that. So now what they're doing is they're just changing the implementation of the laws, including in the manuals that they have jurisdiction over. They're the ones who draft the manuals. Well, the problem here is that Adrian Fontes, our Secretary of State, has changed the manual. And apparently, according to the manual, if you were wearing a red hat or a handbag to the polls, if you wore a shirt that said something like, "It should be easy to vote, but hard to cheat," well, they may have prohibited you from coming into the ballot box. And that's unconstitutional, according to a judge, because it infringes on your free speech rights. Now, there was another interesting provision in here that's called the canvass provision. And they were saying that unless all of the counties, right, this is the Arizona Secretary of State, and they were trying to say that if some counties, like some red counties in Arizona, don't give them the votes by a certain deadline, well, then they're not going to count the votes. And so theoretically, that was giving Adrian Fontes unilateral power and ability to just disenfranchise entire counties in the state of Arizona. And so out of the district court in Arizona, federal court, the judge came out, issued a 50-page order, and it's a good one. He says, actually, this might be unprecedented. See this right here? It's probably unprecedented in the history of the United States. What Adrian Fontes and what our secretary here is trying to do. And he's absolutely right. Okay, these people are lunatics. They tried to throw Trump off the ballot in a number of other states. And so it's just been a roller coaster with them doing everything they can possibly do to try to rig the election in their favor. We're going to read it. It's a good opinion. The judge is not happy with them. These are supposed to be the people that are protecting and enfranchising people to vote, allowing people to speak freely so we can participate in this beautiful American experiment. And instead, they're little tyrants who are trying to silence people and disenfranchise you from voting. If your county has questions about how the vote was conducted and they don't get it canvassed quickly enough, well, then they'll just say, we'll just throw you out, even though they're going to be in compliance with the rules. So we'll see what the judge says. So we've got a bunch of good stuff to get to. Excited to get into some of those Kari Lake updates and understand what's happening in Arizona with our very important Senate race, because she was out there debating Ruben Gallego. And so speaking of Ruben Gallego, we got to talk about testosterone, because testosterone, sometimes a lot of men think that it's being drained by your age or genetics or a lack of exercise. Some of that may be true, but it might also be the food that you're eating. And a lot of the times they tell us that, oh, this is healthy, just eat that. Well, unfortunately, a lot of that healthy stuff is packed with bad stuff. It's not just the junk food. It's not just the sugar. It's even the healthy stuff. And inside, there's stuff that's going to drain your energy, crush your motivation, make things bad. But the good news is just cut it out and things get better. And how do you do that? Well, our friends at V-Shred have seen firsthand with their clients how they handle all this. Guys who stopped eating this garbage are building muscle, burning fat. They're feeling more energized than they have in years. It happens quickly. And so our friends at V-Shred, they're behind cutting edge fitness and nutrition. They have released this video that's going to show you exactly what this testosterone killing food is and why removing it from your diet is going to be amazing. So check it out. The link is down in the description below. Go to sculptnation.com/Robert, sculptnation.com/Robert. V-Shred's experts break it all down. One simple change, life gets much better. So check it out. Not going to miss this one thing in this video. You're going to love it. sculptnation.com/Robert. Links are down in the description below. All right. Now, we have fanny business to attend to. We're going to Fulton County in Georgia, and we're going to see what's happening there with the election. Fulton County, the land of Fannie Willis, does not want to be monitored in the 2024 election, and they're now suing to stop it. In fact, you can see they filed a verified petition for declaratory and injunctive relief, saying we want the court to say that we're right, they're wrong. We can have our monitors, not their monitors. And they want them to stop with their stop their subpoenas and stop their harassment of Fulton County by issuing an injunction saying stop doing these things. and the big question that we'll have as we read through this is, why doth Fannie and Fulton protest too much? Why are they so concerned with having monitors if it was such a safe and secure and free and fair election last time in 2020? Never mind the water main break there in State Farm Arena and all of the other shenanigans that we saw. Never mind all of that. If it was so free and fair, why did Judge Amy Totenberg from Georgia write a huge monster opinion explaining how corrupt the systems were that we read here? If you missed that, that is a must watch. Amy Totenberg. Because there are major problems. So after all that happened, they agreed to have some monitors. Now Fulton County is fighting it. So here's what Fulton County, home of Fannie Willis, says. You know, in the latest blitz of last-minute attempts to drastically impact the election, with early voting is starting in just a few days, and the election is on the 5th, a few days from there, the state election board, those amazing people that we saw yesterday that have been very, very accommodating to Fulton County, have demanded that the Fulton County BRE capitulate to the appointment of multiple election, they call them monitors, right? We don't want your monitors that have been handpicked by you people for the upcoming election. Saying the state election board has no statutory authority to force us to accept this and to force Fulton County to pay for election monitors that were picked by them. They don't have any statutory authority. And by the way, this came out, just to be clear on this came out and it was explained to us by the board yesterday. We talked about it on the show. They're not referencing their statutory authority for this. This came about after an election complaint came to their board, and she articulated what there were. There were like 4 different complaints there. 17,000 ballots we don't have images for, and these we have got problems here, and this person said this person was, like, she listed 4 things. Somebody brought a complaint to the state election board. They said, hey, Fulton County, you're being complained about. This is a victim. You're the person committing the harm. And so how about we settle this? Guess what? Fulton County came in. They settled it. They agreed to have monitors. So they're not referencing. So it's their compliance, their acquiescence to the terms to settle the case as part of the deal that is binding them. It's not the statutory authority at all. Now, the allegations giving rise to the current demand for additional election monitors for the election involve 2020 election violations that they say have already been investigated multiple times. And Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, and the review board have already looked into this. And so we don't need monitors for 2024 because you're complaining about 2020, and in the 2020 election, we've already investigated that. Now, more recently, Fannie and her Fulton people say more recently, following another investigation of 2020 by Raffensperger, the state election board agreed to resolve the issue by issuing a letter of reprimand to Fulton, the appointment of independent monitors agreeable to Fulton, the secretary, and the board. Right? That's that private agreement they all agreed to. And it's like, okay, so great. You guys admit that right here. Like, you admit that this came from an agreement. So why are you spending all this time in paragraph 2 talking about the statutory authority? It's a red herring because they're not referencing that statutory authority. They're not just pulling this out of their booties and saying, hey, we've decided to investigate or to unilaterally appoint monitors to you. It's not what they're saying. The state election board issued its letter of reprimand back in June of this year. Then Fulton, the secretary, and Fulton, which must pay for the monitoring, have all agreed to an independent monitoring proposal. But the state election board has refused to agree to that proposal. Moreover, the state election board has not even presented them with a memorandum of understanding that sets forth the terms acceptable. Instead, members of the board have insisted that they pay for a slate of additional monitors handpicked by them. And by the way, it would be handpicked by the, as they say all the time, bipartisan board that apparently is made up of 3 people who have authorized subpoenas against Fulton County. And as we saw yesterday from the board members, they're irritated with Fulton County. Memorandum of understanding, they said they voted on the subpoena because they're so tired of trying to get your understanding there in Fulton. They've already made multiple list requests and been accommodating all the way since June. It's now October. You haven't given them the documents that they've demanded. Now, even more troubling, says the Fulton people, the Board of Elections have stated in meetings that the election board would disavow Fulton County if they did not accept the monitors proposed by them. And they want their own monitors to come in. And the board says, your monitors have a conflict of interest, just like Nathan Wade and Fannie did, and nobody cares. The state board and their latest actions directly conflict with the statutory authority granted to it. Okay, then why did you guys agree to it? The action requests declaratory and injunctive relief. They say, all right, now we seek a declaration that the board lacks authority to force us to accept and pay for the monitors that were handpicked by them. And in connection with this request for declaratory relief, they also seek an injunction to stop them from taking any formal action to force them to accept our monitors. They do not want to be monitored by their board. Petitioner intends to seek immediate relief if they take any action against us. And so the subpoena came after this lawsuit was filed. So the parties, we know, Fulton County State Board and the defendant, state of Georgia, can be served through Brian Kemp. Now they say in Georgia, each county has an elections superintendent, and Fulton County, in the county, they assigned management responsibility to the Fulton County DRE, the Board Registration of Elections. It's going to be a little bit confusing because we've got a bunch of boards here. But state boards, county boards. Now, the state board has statutory limited enforcement powers that do not include forcing them to use monitors. They say that the law doesn't give them the power to force them to do it. And it's coming at this saying, it's like, well, then why did you agree to do it, right? You should have raised that objection before you entered into a settlement agreement where you said, we'll appoint monitors. No provision of this authorizes them to appoint monitors to force us to do it. But you agreed to do it as part of terms of the settlement. Now, after they appointed a performance review board in 2021, the review board recommended taking action over the board, which they accepted. Now, when the alleged violations that were investigated talked about double scanning. Now, as this report explained, multiple additional protective measures have been added to ensure that the double scanning of ballots that occurred in 2020 is not something that happens again. Wow, that's interesting. I thought they said that nothing like that happened because it was the most safe and secure election of our entire lives and in the entire universe. Now, the performance review addressed numerous other allegations, and it did not recommend the removal of the Fulton County Board. Now, it emphasized that they were engaged in driving improvements, and so we can keep the board. They're not that bad. And so the state election board approved the performance review. So, like, we may have had problems, but we fixed them, and you guys approved our fixed problems. Then, after another complaint that was resolved, we agreed to monitors. In July 2022, 2 voters filed a complaint with the board against Fulton County and Fulton County, 2 boards, BRE and DRE, about election violations. In May, the Secretary of State investigator reported the results of the investigation, finding that Fulton County double scanned a small number of ballots during 2020 recount, but otherwise rejected virtually all of the other allegations. So, okay, there you go. They did double scan some ballots in Georgia. Great. Despite finding double scanning of a small number of ballots, the Secretary of State investigator could not conclude, and what is small, like 5 or like 5,000? The investigator could not conclude the ballots had been counted twice in the final counts for 2020. So, oh no, it was just during the recount, and we didn't include those in the numbers anyway. So it was small, but not small enough that they mention it, right? If it was like less than 100, they probably would have mentioned it. What is the number? Now, the Secretary of State investigator also noted, even if these votes had been counted twice, the outcome would not have changed. Okay. Yeah, but you can't admit that you did double count that one bucket of votes and say that there was a problem with that one bucket, because then we start asking, well, what other buckets have you not investigated or looked into yet? Now, 4 state board election members attended the presentation. They were there. Now, following the presentation, the board members offered several motions to fix some of this. None of those motions got a second. Finally, Mr. Lindsay made a motion for a letter of reprimand. And then, check it, the state election board, the secretary, and Fulton County reached a mutual agreement. There you go, it's a contract for Fulton County to retain an independent monitor to observe Fulton County in November 24. Boom, they agreed to it. Now, the motion included a stipulation that the parties agree to a monitor by the next hearing in July. In the event the parties could not agree on a monitor, Mr. Lindsay stated he'd come back with a motion to send it to the AG. They seconded the motion, voted 2-1. Johnson voted against, and the other person did not vote. Then in late May, Janelle King assumed Lindsay's seat, and she was fired up yesterday, as we saw. Then they did issue a letter of reprimand, finding that Fulton County violated the election board rules about the double scanning of ballots. Oops. Then it directed the Secretary of State and others to enter into a memorandum of understanding about an election monitor. Then the Secretary of State accepted a monitor proposal by Ryan Germany, the former lawyer for the Secretary of State. Secretary of State's like, yeah, you can use my guy to do this. And they say, wait, what? That's not an independent monitor in any way. Fulton County Board got 2 proposals, one from Ryan Germany, one forwarded from SEB member Janice Johnson. After considering the 2 proposals, the board accepted Germany's proposal and rejected Johnson's. Now, at the end of the board term, then they appointed this person in Fulton County. Then Germany, the other guy who used to work for the Secretary of State, presented his proposal to the board. The state election board met again in August. During the meeting, they talked about 10 additional monitors, adding them to Germany's team. After the meeting with the chair, Fulton County asked them if they could make its proposal at another meeting. The state board, though, did not make an appearance on August 29th. Then at August 29th in Fulton, they voted to reaffirm Germany. The Fulton County Board approved the agreement to have Germany's election team serve as monitors. Then the State Board of Election met September 20th. And they expressed frustration that they were implementing Germany's plan. The board directed the chair to arrange another meeting, and they discussed several issues. Then in October, State Board Johnson member sent Allen an email to add an agenda item, saying that they wanted to add 6 of whom were people to the list. At no time has the state election board presented an executable contract. Okay. Now the conduct as required, and so we seek declaratory relief by ordering them to use certain monitors in the election and let us use Ryan Germany. All right, so here are the counts. They want a request for declaratory judgment. They say there is a controversy here. Their attempt to force us to use certain hand-picked monitors who've already been rejected by us will cause us harm. And so basically, it's a contract dispute, essentially. We agreed to have monitors, but we want to use our monitors. And the board says, well, those are crap monitors, so you can't use those. It's not agreeable to us. And so they seek declaration, the court declaring that they're right, state's wrong, and stopping them from interfering with their monitors in any way. Signed by Michael Tyler. And it's a fun one because it begs the question, why, oh why, is Fulton County so opposed to having the states have some additional monitors there? Why do they want this Ryan Germany fellow and people who are already deeply embedded or formerly embedded with the state government to come in and act as independent monitors? He was general counsel for the Secretary of State. It's not independent at all. He's just like retired and now is going to be monitoring the elections. So interesting. Now, similarly, you may have also seen this. They were trying to investigate the Georgia election board, and they sued to basically remove them And this judge, Judge Glanville, you remember him from the totally disastrous YSL trial, he came out and he dismissed a lawsuit on Wednesday. So Democrats tried to sue to force the governor to investigate the Republican election board, right? Suing to force the governor to investigate the board. They don't like the rules that they've made change. The Democrats can't compel the governor to start ethics hearings, which could lead to removal from office based on letters that they called formal charges. The judge says those are not formal charges, so those are not coming in. But it's very typical for the Democrats. If they don't like your politics, if they don't like you investigating their shenanigans, well, they just come after you and your family and take you out like mobsters. That's what's happening in Georgia. All right. So let's turn our attention to Arizona, because this is also a big win here in Arizona. And we're excited about this opinion because it came from a federal district judge. And here is what this one looks like. A major win in Arizona for election integrity and free speech. You can see America First Policy Institute posted this press release, and they're referencing this order from a federal judge, United States District Court in the state of Arizona, about our upcoming election. And this is an issue we've talked about a lot here, saying that various secretaries of states, like ours in Arizona, this guy's name is Adrian Fontes, and what they do now is they're not changing all of the actual rules. They tried to do a lot of this back in 2020 via settlement agreements, right? People would sue to change the election laws based on COVID. They'd enter into settlement agreements, and then there would be a court order that would adjust the implementation of the election. Similar thing is happening here. They're trying to adjust the implementation, the infrastructure of the election. But this is not through a settlement agreement that's been entered into by a friendly litigant and the government. It's now by changing the manual. They're just changing not the rules per se, but the implementation of the rules and how they accept things and how items are transferred back and forth. But what happened here is Adrian Fontes tried to manipulate and rig the election manual to serve his party and to disenfranchise voters and to curtail your free speech. And that's according to a federal judge. And so we'll read through this opinion. But first, it came from this group, the America First Policy Institute. They say, been a big victory. A federal judge granted both motions for a preliminary injunction and holding that the EPM and their changes were violations of the First Amendment. Here's what they say. AFPI and co-counsel Holtzman Vogel said, what they tried to do here in this manual is make it a crime to engage in expression that is protected free speech. You could even simply wear a red hat. Illegal. Or you could wear a handbag that says something like, it should be easy to vote, but hard to cheat. And then you could just come under the scrutiny of our secretary. So the court issued a ruling. They're very happy about it. They say, we applaud this court's ruling. And so shout out to Pam Bondi, shout out to Ken Blackwell and our friends at AFPI for delivering this nice victory. But here's what went down. In Arizona, a nice opinion from the judge. The judge says this might be the most unprecedented attempt to disenfranchise voters in America. Here's what the judge wrote. All right, listen. Given the widespread controversy surrounding elections, one would hope the last people responsible for disenfranchising voters and suppressing speech, the very last people to do that would be the very election officials who were tasked with ensuring fair and accurate elections in the first place. We'd hope that they wouldn't do that. But guess what? They are. That's precisely the case here, according to the plaintiffs. Now, every odd-numbered year, the Arizona Secretary of State comes out with a new election procedures manual governing the administration of the elections in Arizona. Now, these people filing this suit, American Encore and the other plaintiffs, are challenging two of the provision changes. The first change prohibits controversial speech at polling places, or the judge says perhaps everywhere else in Arizona. We don't really know. And the guy wants total power, and that's how they operate. Saying that this speech provision in the manual mandates, quote, any activity by a person with the intent or effect of threatening, harassing, intimidating, or coercing voters, or conspiring with others to do so inside or outside the 75-foot limit at a voting location is prohibited. So he just wrote that in his little manual. Any activity with the intent or effect. So like if you wear a red hat, maybe it doesn't say MAGA on it, but let's say you wear a red hat in there. Maybe somebody says, ah, I've been offended. I've been intimidated by your headwear. And they freak out and they make a complaint. Well, that would be outside the rules. Maybe they throw you out of the polling place. Now, the rule goes on to list examples of conduct that, quote, may also be considered intimidating conduct inside or outside the polling place, like raising one's voice, using or insulting or offensive language to a voter or a poll worker. Now, if those activities occur, election officials have the discretion to remove that person and their red hat from the polling places. Now, the second rule, probably unprecedented in the history of the United States, gives Adrian Fontes, the Arizona secretary, nearly carte blanche authority to disenfranchise the ballots of potentially millions of Arizona voters. The court refers to this as the canvass provision, and here's what the canvass provision says. In the manual, he just gets to do this. He says, if the official canvass of any county has not been received by this deadline, then the Secretary of State must proceed with the state canvass without including the votes of the missing county. Wow. So if like a county like Yavapai County were to say, something's interesting, we're going to just do a hand recount or we're going to investigate this. And it's not received by this deadline, so I don't know if that's a self-imposed deadline that's in the manual or what, then we're just not going to include it. For example, the Secretary of State is not permitted to use an unofficial vote count in lieu of the official canvass. So if you don't get it to us by our deadline, then your votes are dead. Well, that would be great, because what they're doing is the cities in Arizona are all blue. The the more rural counties are red. And so if one of these rural counties gets a little bit of an attitude problem like they did last time, well, then we're just not going to count your votes. And so just deal with it. Now, plaintiffs in this action, the people suing our government, say that this violates the Constitution in a number of different ways. And the court gives us some background on this. They say, all right, yeah, the Arizona law does give them the power to adjust and create a manual that's approved by the governor and the AG. And the speech provision initially came in 2019. So some time ago. Now, the canvass provision is a new edition of 2023. Addressing the certification concerns that happened after 2022, Adrian Fontes just changed the manual, the election manual, to permit himself to proceed with the state canvass without the votes of any county that fails to timely canvass the results. Isn't that amazing? I'll just take that power now. So I'm just going to reject your votes. Now, on July 31st, the secretary published a draft version of this. There was 14 days to comment. During that time, members of the legislature did express concern over that, including the speech provision and the First Amendment. But the secretary didn't change anything after receiving approval from Katie Hobbs and Chris Mays, two ultra Democrats. The secretary then issued the final manual, right? So a bunch of comments, Republicans have said about it, but all three Democrats just decide, oh no, that's good enough. No problem at all. And they move forward with it. So now they tell us that the people filing this lawsuit, they're nonprofit people. They filed their complaint. They challenge both of these provisions, saying it violates the Constitution. Now, after filing their complaint, they moved for an injunction to stop this stuff from being implemented. And then on August 5th, they moved to stay, the government moved to stay count 2 of the complaint and more. So now let's talk about standing, right? Standing comes up in these things a lot. We'll fast forward to the juicy bits. You have to have an injury in order to bring a claim. You can't just kind of bring a claim without having some interest in it, right? An injury or an injury in fact. Now, the first theory of harm about these changes is that the canvass provision inflicts an injury on people's right to vote. There are several cases they rely on in order to show this. Now, the existence of this scheme is like an injury in fact. Here are the reasons. First, they note that the canvass provision mandates that the secretary exclude votes from a county that does not timely canvass. So it's not speculative, okay? It's in the text. Then they argue that the refusal to disavow enforcement, so like you're going to enforce that, right? Or will you enforce that or will you not enforce that? He's not saying that he won't enforcement, so it lends to credibility. So he's like, yeah, I actually will not count the votes. In July, they sent him, Adrian Fontes, a letter saying, you're not gonna enforce this, right? You disavow that. You're gonna commit to some other mechanism for ascertaining the votes if the votes are not certified, right? He said, no, I'm committing to enfranchising all Arizona voters, but he will not disavow this non-discretionary statutory duty, right? So he's okay. So he says, I'll do it. I'm going to use it. And lastly, they say that his failure, that a county official's failure to timely canvass the county is likely given that Cochise refused to certify 2022. It's likely, like it's happened last time in Cochise. The complaint alleges that following this, the Board of Supervisors there refused to certify that, and there was a delay. They certified only after the secretary obtained mandamus relief against the board. But under the newly enacted provision, if they didn't do that, then they would just disenfranchise the entire county. Okay, last time they had to go to the courts, force them to do the job. They did it. But now he just says, you're gone. We don't want your votes at all. And so they say, well, we're allowed to do that. I mean, we have to do this. Time comes up. And so if we don't get the votes in time, then it doesn't matter. So there's some more standing stuff. They say, yeah, this is redressable. All right. You can fix this. Just don't enforce the provision. If we actually have a court order that stops them from doing this, it will redress the injuries because they will not be disenfranchised and more. Now, other people came in here and are making similar complaints. AFPI is here. They've got interest in protecting their constituents. Now let's talk about the free speech provision. The court now assesses whether they can contest the free speech provisions. Now, as a threshold matter, the court concludes that the speech provision does regulate them. Why? It's broad. The speech provision prohibits any activities by a person done with the intent or effect of harassing, intimidating voters. Now, the rule lacks any geographic limit. It prohibits speech both inside and outside the voting location. And other companies and organizations say that our activities might fall within this. And so therefore it covers them. Now, whether plaintiffs whether their claims constitute an injury in fact is a more difficult question. And so they don't have standing. The compliance cost theory is insufficient to establish some of these other standings as to that standing as to those other issues. So we'll come back on that. A lot of standing stuff that we're kind of fast forwarding through right now. Now, there's a credible threat of enforcement, as we've already articulated. And here, that showing has been made. Fast forwarding through this. Now, as the people filing the suit have explained here, they're not modifying the speech provision. There was a 14-day public comment. Legislature was unhappy about it. People talking about this violating the First Amendment. And if it doesn't regulate speech, if this is for something else that doesn't regulate speech, you should have modified the manual to talk about that, but you didn't do that. Earlier, they sent a bunch of letters to the Secretary and the AG asking them to disavow the speech provision. But they refused to do that. And so it seems like they are going to enforce it. So it's a real thing. Now, lastly, the threat of enforcement is also further bolstered by likelihood that the speech provision will be enforced by election officials and poll workers at voting locations, right? They got the rule book. They got the manual. Now, they think there is a credible threat of this, and people have self-censored as a result. And let's see what else is good in here. So the court was not going to abstain from this. And then we get to the motion to dismiss. All right, so here's some better stuff. Now, the government wants this lawsuit dismissed. Adrian Fontes moved to dismiss this. He says there's no claim here. And they make several allegations that we do have a claim. First, they say the canvass provision is burdening the right to vote. If you disenfranchise an entire county, their vote doesn't count. The plaintiff says she's a registered voter in Arizona. She's going to vote. Several members of this organization are also going to vote. And the provision threatens to disenfranchise every single person in the county. So we could be disqualified. It's not good for us. Now, considering that, yeah, this could be a severe burden. It could come up. We don't know. The right to vote is fundamental. And if they can just disenfranchise the whole county, that's going to harm this person. So they do have standing here. And so the motion to dismiss from the government will be denied. Now, the court now turns to the free speech provision. They assert here that they engage in constitutionally protected activities that are prohibited by this provision. They argue that it violates Supreme Court precedent by criminalizing speech without a culpable mental state. They contend that it improperly prohibits speech merely for being offensive, which is already established under the First Amendment as something that's allowed. It's offensive conduct. Offensive speech must be protected. Plaintiffs also allege that the speech provision is unlawful. Now, by its plain terms, just reading what's in the rule book, the speech provision prohibits any speech that offends or insults another if it has the intent or effect of intimidating, harassing, or threatening a worker. Now, that rule provides no geographic limitation, as the prohibition extends to any activity inside or outside the 75-foot limit at a voting location, right? So there's a line in it or out. So I guess it could go all the way to your house. Thus, the speech that a listener finds too loud, too offensive, or too insolent, potentially anywhere in Arizona, is prohibited because Adrian and Mays and Hobbs don't want you to hear about it. But it has long been established that speech may not be prohibited. Now, while a court is not required to accept legal conclusions, they find that the speech provision infringes on their right to speech. Now, they also say this is unconstitutional because it violates the Due Process Clause. Nobody even knows what this means. The law is unconstitutionally vague so that you can't apply it. The rule prohibits way more speech than state intimidation laws do, and that violates fair notice. Under Arizona laws, speech knowingly made to intimidate or coerce voters is prohibited, but under the speech provision, Speech is prohibited solely based on reaction. Okay? See these words here? Knowingly made. Knowingly. So you have a mens rea. You have a mental state. You intended, you knew that the things you were going to say were going to intimidate, and you made those statements anyways, knowing that it was going to cause that or intending to cause that. But here, doesn't matter. If somebody is offended, it's based on the receiver. Because the speech provision is inconsistent with state intimidation laws, yeah, nobody has fair notice of what's even prohibited. And the rule prohibits offensive and insulting speech. Doesn't even define what that means. Why is a red hat offensive to you? Without any limitation, election officials and poll workers have nearly unfettered discretion in regulating a voter's speech. The failure to ascribe any meaningful standards here to the prohibited speech increases the likelihood that this is going to be arbitrarily enforced. And so accordingly, we're not dismissing it there. Now, they want us, the government, to not have these things implemented in the manual. So now we're going back to the plaintiff, the people bringing this claim. Can they force them to revise the manual? They give us some analysis. Now, no one disputes the right to vote is fundamental. Now, given these competing concerns of trying to regulate and govern elections, making sure everybody votes, we have to ask ourselves, was there a burden on the right to vote by Adrian Fontes implementing his little election changes? They say the canvas provision here is utterly without precedent. Just get rid of an entire county of people. Those are the Democrats. If the right to vote is the right of qualified voters to cast their ballots, it's to have them counted, not just to fill out a piece of paper and say, I voted. This imposes the most severe burden, state-sanctioned disenfranchisement, so that they can just get rid of the problematic counties. Okay, those counties are red counties. So if they could just nuke 1,000, let's say, Cochise is not a huge county, but let's say you got 10,000 votes. That's maybe dispositive in a close election. Indeed, defendants even agree on this point, stating that if plaintiffs in fact voted and their votes were not included, that would constitute a severe burden. Yeah, obviously. Now, the magnitude of this harm, if triggered, is severe, all right? At oral arguments, the government stated that there are 2.4 million registered voters in Maricopa County. Now, under this provision, all 2.4 million, right? So they made this provision so that they could just get rid of Cochise and Yavapai and some of the other red counties in Arizona. But the judge said, well, what about Maricopa? Because they're in charge of Maricopa. Obviously, it's big, it's blue, it's where Phoenix is. And that's, Chris Mays, Katie Hobbs, Adrian Fontes, they're all right there downtown hanging out with themselves. So they would never imagine that Maricopa County would be excluded. So the judge just says, well, what if we just exclude Maricopa? How about that? Could we do that? And they said, well, yeah, technically we could. Oh, okay. So according to your manual, you could just dump 2.4 million votes out. Are you nuts? You're going to exclude them based on the actions of a quorum of Maricopa County Board of Supervisors and Adrian, the secretary? Like, are you guys nuts? You think Trump's an insurrectionist and you're trying to change a manual so that Adrian can just disenfranchise everybody? Other jurisdictions have recognized that disenfranchising even thousands of voters is a severe burden. Now, the burden here is also classified as severe because it operates without the fault of the voter. The court has recognized that this is a big deal. This is why courts have routinely held that voting prerequisite laws often impose only a slight or minimal burden on voters. But in Arizona, under this scheme, this is a case of threatened disenfranchisement en masse. A threat realized by the actions that are all done at the discretion of little dictator Fontes. A registered voter in Arizona may perfectly comply with all voting requirements and obligations, but nonetheless have her vote excluded based on the public officials. So therefore, the burden is severe. Now, the government even agrees that if the secretary effectuates that and does disenfranchise it, it would be severe. But they say, but it's not realistically severe because likely it's not going to be enforced. But we don't care about that. And so the court is finding that there is a credible threat of enforcement here. And if it is enforced, it's a severe burden. Now, they say that they're justified in doing this. Well, we have to do this. It's necessary. It's better for election results to be final. We want things to be done rather than accurate, right? Well, get us the votes to us now. Well, what if they're not accurate? We want them now. Well, what if they're, problematic? Then we're not counting them. It's better to disenfranchise a few, they said, a few, rather than potentially millions, as opposed to all. But what value does finality accomplish when it is attained at the expense of democracy? Great question, Judge. The government have not provided this court an answer, and they've not demonstrated why it's necessary to burden our rights if there's many other alternatives to ensure finality and to stop the disenfranchisement of the voters. Even if the government proffered justifications, even if they were compelling, the provision is also going to fail strict scrutiny, constitutional muster, because it's not narrowly tailored to achieve their state's objectives. There are other less burdensome alternatives. For example, the court asked during a conference, well, can't the manual, instead of disenfranchising them, rather than just not counting them, can't you say something like, well, in the case of a county where the county officials don't certify, the Secretary of State shall be designated to make that certification in place of the County Board of Supervisors. Wouldn't that be an appropriate remedy? So you can just take the position, you just make the decision. The Secretary makes the decision over the board. You just give yourself that rule. So then you just say what the final number is and accept that number. You don't just disenfranchise the millions. Is that better? That's one thing you could do that's different than this. Because here we have an option of disenfranchising millions, or you could just accept the number for finality and then we could come back and figure it out later rather than just disenfranchising them. Is that possible? The government said it is possible. Yeah. Oh, so there's other things you could do. So then that's not the most narrowly tailored possibility, because you could do something else that's not as severe as this. Got it. So since then, their briefs reiterate there are other less nuclear alternatives. Mandamus relief they could prosecute unruly county supervisors. And they said, well, what happens if it is triggered? Well, they said we'd probably go back to court anyways. They said the secretary is committed that he'll do everything within his power, including filing a mandamus seeking other court intervention to avoid this canvass result. Okay, so just do those things. You don't need the provision in the manual then. Yeah, I don't disagree that mandamus is the way to resolve this problem, they said. Yeah, so you know how to do it. Now, in addition, there are other alternatives. There are other less restrictive means. The secretary could certify in lieu. They could get a declaratory judgment and do other things. And so it's not narrowly tailored. And therefore, if it's infringing on a right, it should be the compelling and narrowly tailored. This is not. Now, is there irreparable injury here? Of course. If they enforce this, the harm, mass disenfranchisement, will be irreparable. Their votes will not count. The whole election might change. And so if we balance all the equities, we have to determine whether this will favor the plaintiffs. The prohibition is broad, and the speech provision would prohibit any person from intimidating a voter. And the final clause is also broad. Accordingly, by its terms, this speech provision is a broad prohibition on activities, including speech anywhere at any time, so long as it's done with the intent or effect of intimidating a voter. Because it's ambiguous, we don't really care about its meaning. We're not going to investigate it further. At the heart of their arguments, they say it's necessary, right? People will say bad things at election polling places. And so obviously, if they're trying to regulate speech, we have to analyze it as though they're trying to regulate speech. Now, as the court noted, the First Amendment overbreadth doctrine permits courts to hold a statute facially unconstitutional, even though it has some lawful applications. It's just overbroad. This speech provision broadly encroaches on a substantial amount of constitutionally protected speech. Here, it allows election officials to use their sound judgment, I'm sure, to remove voters for using offensive or insulting speech. If it's too loud, if it's too offensive in the eyes of some rando, then you can be thrown out of the polling place. The provision also imposes liability for speech if it has the effect of threatening. The effect. This lacks a mens rea. We need mens rea, which is a guilty mental state. And so it's also void for vagueness under the Due Process Clause because nobody knows what it means. You can just be prosecuted, essentially, thrown out of the polling place. No one has fair notice about what this means. There's no meaningful standard for defining aggressive behavior. The defendants make their arguments. They say it was adopted a long time ago in 2019. So let it be. Nobody complained about it until now. And they said, well, now we know. This is when members publicly expressed concern in 2023. And so now we're considering it. Now, plaintiffs have established a First Amendment claim. They've alleged they've self-censored. Intangible injuries are happening here. And so now we need to talk about the public interest. And so accordingly, it is ordered the following. The government's motion to dismiss count 2 is denied. We have some standing issues. And as you can see, boom, this is the victory. The government, Adrian Fontes, is enjoined from enforcing the canvass provision during the pendency of this litigation. It's also ordered that Fontes and the government are enjoined from enforcing the speech provision as well. And it's finally ordered that the government must answer this complaint within 14 days. So we're looking at a response in early to mid-October, and we'll see what the government says in response. But seemingly between now and the election, the free speech provision, which was intending to gag people and giving the government the ability to throw you out of a polling place, is now gone. And the canvass provision, which would have given Adrian Fontes the power to disenfranchise an entire county that he didn't want to count their votes, gone. And it is indicative, it's instructive of who these people are. Another Secretary of State acting like the rest of the Democrat Secretary of States, trying to throw Trump off the ballot in multiple states, trying to waive the election requirements to actually check signatures, calling it a presumption of validity in Michigan and everywhere. Scammers all around. They're trying to cheat right now. They are cheating in real time, and they're getting caught and called out on it. And so Fontes loses again. We're excited to see that. We'll be here covering Arizona as this madness continues to unfold. All right. And now, speaking of Arizona, let's turn our attention to the debate that took place yesterday, because you can see Arizona's not happy about it. You know, the Kari Lake and Ruben Gallego debate was a victory for Kari when Arizona Central and the Arizona Republic comes out and complains about the TV. This is awful TV. It didn't teach us anything. What a waste of time. You can see the report is the only debate here seemed like it was the Kari Lake show on Wednesday. It was the Kari Lake show, and moderators seemed powerless to stop it. Lake, the Republican candidate, met for the first time. It was frustrating. It was maddening. Though, given the way Lake treats these things, I'm not sure what else we could have expected. Domination. They covered a variety of issues. but you walked away feeling like you haven't learned much. And Kari Lake got away with it. Oh, that's what you call cope. So that's how you can just say, well, you know how this went. I've got several clips of this. We'll poke around. Obviously, in Arizona, the border came up time and time again, and Kari Lake was hitting it hard. Said, we're losing a generation of young people to fentanyl, and Ruben should know better. He should stop this, but he hasn't been able to do it in all his time in government.
500,000 pounds of drugs seized at ports of entry. What is the bigger threat to you, the flow of migrants or the flow of drugs? 1 minute.
They're both terrible. It's a war against America. We have an invasion of people coming in. And I remember seeing video of they look like soldiers coming in. Soldiers from other countries coming and pouring across our border. And then we have the cartels empowered by Ruben Gallego trafficking drugs into our state. We are the funnel for fentanyl. I have met so many parents and loved ones on the campaign trail who come up to me and they wait usually till the end of an event. You can spot it. There's a sorrow that you see in their face. And they come up to me at the end of an event and they say, I lost my son. He was 16 years old. He took a half of what he thought was a Xanax pill. And he's not with us. A 20-year-old daughter, a young mother. We are losing a generation of people. We're losing an entire generation of young people. And you should know better, Ruben. You've even said this. You have admitted that you have a loved one who was a convicted felon drug trafficker, who's trafficked drugs into our country.
Mr. Gallego, a minute to respond to this.
I want to finish this because I feel for you. You got emotional talking about that, a close relative of yours. And for you to continue to vote to empower cartels to bring in fentanyl, which is a weapon of mass destruction, into our country, you talked about the sorrow.
Mr. Gallego, 1 minute.
He talked about the sorrow he felt from having a family member who trafficked drugs and how hard it was for him. And what you're doing to families right now, Ruben, is you're making that be their reality. You're making it so moms and dads out there are losing people because of drugs. Your
Mr.
votes
Gallego.
on the border have empowered the cartels.
And they were trying to cut her off, and Gallego just kind of sat there and took it. Got to speak up there, man. They gave you like 3 opportunities to jump in on it, but he didn't really want to jump in on it too much. And so here's another clip. This one was clipped for us over from Beheezy Tweets, our friend George over there. And they're talking about abortion. Here's another exchange.
Left to the states. I agree with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She said this should be a decision left to the states. Everyone knew it was unconstitutional. And Arizona, and I want to speak to the women of Arizona. I'm the only woman on this stage right now. I don't think I'm standing next to a woman. And so I understand how difficult these choices may be. And we have the choice as Arizonans to decide what our abortion law will be. It's going to be up to us, and we're going to decide in November when we go and cast our ballot. And Ruben Gallego wants to take that choice away from us. He wants to take it back to the federal government in some back room with Chuck Schumer and decide what our abortion law will be here in Arizona. It's going to be up to us. I want us to have that choice. And whatever the law ends up being, whatever our choice ends up being, I will respect. I come from a large family. I'm the youngest of 9. And we had 8 girls, so I know a lot about women. I have a daughter myself, and I want to make sure that we have the choice to decide what our abortion law is here in Arizona. He knows, and Steve, you know this as well, we're running for federal office. This isn't going to be decided in the Senate. This is not. And I will tell you this, I will never pass a federal abortion ban, nor will I approve or vote for federal tax dollars being used for abortion. But here's what I will do, because I'm a mother and I care deeply about women. And because things have gotten so desperate in this country, more and more people are choosing to have an abortion because they can't afford to live, let alone take care of a baby. I don't want any woman out there to make that choice because she can't afford to live because of the votes that people like Ruben Gallego have made that have made our economy practically collapse. It's on life support right now. So I want to go to the U.S. Senate and pass the most pro-family legislation. I want to make sure that UVF is protected. I have many friends who are here. They're my friends today because of UVF. And I have many of my friends who have had children and experienced the joy of motherhood and parenthood because of UVF. This is sad because Ruben Gallego doesn't really care about women's rights. When it comes to our women, our girls who are athletes, he wants us to have to compete against men, biological men.
And went off on that, and Gallego was not very responsive. Now, I've got a bunch of clips queued up. Let's see what this one was.
Mrs. Lake, a minute to respond.
He voted against President Trump's national emergency on the border. He said the border's not that big of a deal in Arizona when he was talking to people who were donating money to his campaign, and said he's not an expert on the border. We need somebody who understands the threat on the border, and I do. And President Trump does, and on day one, we're going to get busy undoing the damage caused by Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and Ruben Gallego, who's voted with him 100% of the time. Can you imagine voting with the Kamala Harris and Joe Biden 100% of the time, especially when it comes to the border? You know, this isn't just about an open border. We've got 20 million people pouring in. They're taking jobs, they're taking housing. This is why nobody can afford housing anymore, because we're having to compete with people who've come in illegally. I am completely opposed to an open border. I am 100% for legal immigration. My mother-in-law came here legally, and all of the incredible immigrants of this country who came here legally are horrified by the votes that my opponent has taken. They're horrified by what Kamala Harris has done. And by the way, that piece of legislation, thank you for reminding me, I am not for it, and it's because it would codify into law
She's a steamroller.
5,000 people every day coming in illegally. That means 5,000 people every day would be pouring across our border illegally. That law did nothing to stop child sex trafficking. 350,000 children have been trafficked across our border since Ruben Gallego and Kamala Harris opened up that border. 350,000, and they've lost track of them.
And you can see this guy this entire time after that 1 minute, right? 1 minute's up. They give her a minute to respond. And he's kind of, see that finger right there? He's putting that finger up there. Okay, you're cut off. And she's just a bulldozer. She just keeps going. And she should, right? That's how you dominate the debate stage. Absolutely appropriate to do that. It's expected. You're not just going to sit there and take it like Ruben Gallego did. He also got asked about Social Security, and here was this exchange.
Specifically, you mentioned Social Security specifically.
Yeah.
How do you maintain it? Because Arizona has one of the highest populations of seniors, and they're worried about this. How do you maintain Social Security without privatizing it? 30 seconds, please.
I want people who are on Social Security to know you have paid into that. That is an insurance benefit you've paid into, and we are not touching that. Ruben Gallego, Kamala Harris, and the Democrats will decimate it. They want to make it so you can't, the age that you have to be to qualify to get your Social Security, they want to raise that, and they also want to take Medicare. He promised he wouldn't touch Medicare. They wouldn't raise or ruin Medicare and touch it, and they have. He wants Medicare for all, which really means Medicaid for all, and that will be a disaster for Arizona families. I have to mention the prescription drug prices. He touts that he brought that down. His vote in the Inflation Reduction Act actually caused medications to go up for people on Part
Thank
D.
you.
57% increase in price.
Specifically.
All right, so Kari Lake, and there was more that came out on this because apparently they were digging into his residence, and he said that the DC home, his home in DC, was his principal residence. This was an old story. I guess it came back up last night. When he bought a house near the Capitol Hill last year, he claimed his Washington property as his primary residence as part of a special mortgage rate afforded to military veterans. But they also say their Phoenix home is their primary residence. The loan documents for Politico confirmed he counts D.C. as his primary home, even though his campaign says he lives in Arizona. Yeah. Politically, it means that Kirsten Sinema, who he was running against, who's not running again, may have to explain some things. So anyways, yeah, this guy's a D.C. individual. And so the debate continued on last night. He was asked about the border wall, and he says it's just a stupid idea, a stupid Trump idea.
The border wall, and can it upstand and withhold without adding extra security and billions on technology.
I just jotted down Ruben's exact quote. He called it the dumb, stupid border wall. He wrote an op-ed that said why we should never build Trump's wall ever. So we're getting the extreme makeover version of Ruben tonight. Ruben has voted against border security every step of the way. Remember, I covered the state for 27 years. I was in your home. And all that time we watched as career politicians said they were going to secure the border and give us border security. And they never did until President Trump came along and actually secured the border. But he had to do it with one hand tied behind his back because people like my opponent were fighting him every step of the way, would not give a penny for that border wall. That border wall keeps us safe. We've seen it here in Arizona because we've seen those areas where the border wall is there and people aren't coming through. Where there are gaps in it, people are pouring through. And Ruben Gallego has supported every step of the way Kamala Harris, the border czar, and Joe Biden's open border policy, which has ushered in 20 million people illegally, including more than 400,000 convicted criminals, and they've done nothing to secure the border. The only piece of legislation that Mr. Gallego has put forth was not about border security. It was about removing the word illegal alien from anything in the federal government paperwork. He's more worried about semantics than our security. And right now, we know that we have terrorists that are coming through. We're worried about a potential terrorist attack on our home soil. We want to be able to go for a jog in the morning like Lake and Riley did and not have to worry about being killed, raped, and murdered. And we're not safe because of the people that have come in. Ruben Gallego has empowered the cartels. I want to finish the border wall. On day one, my first piece of legislation will be to fully fund and expedite the construction of the border wall. It's unfortunate we already paid for the construction materials to do that. But Ruben Gallego and Kamala Harris they sold that $325 million of border material for pennies on the dollar. They gave it away. We could have had that wall finished.
It's so disgusting what they did. It's selling out your country for pennies on the dollar, literally, and then having foreign invaders come into your country. So Kari Lake crushed it yesterday, and we're excited to see this performance, and we're going to be supporting her and watching her surge to victory in Arizona. All right. And so, my friends, it's been a beautiful day. Obviously, we're here. It's an early stream. Thank you so much for joining us. Your boy is going to be out the rest of the day at a conference. I'm super excited about it, and I'm sure I'll have some juicy, delicious nuggets to come back and share with you. But we'll be out of pocket the rest of the day. It's like 9 to 9 all day today, so I'm excited about it. But let's see who is here and joining us on the beautiful day. We had some great donos that came in, my friends. And we have some other good segments from our Membo stream that are being released today. So if you're looking for some other things to watch, come back to the channel. We have some new segments that just dropped on the Afghanistan national criminal charges and some other ones that were good. So check that out. We had some comments that came in from our YouTube friends. What's up, YouTube friends? We've got Mama Ro is here. Mama Ro said, glad to catch you live early and on my birthday. Happy birthday, Mama Ro. Very happy birthday to you. Thanks for being a membo for 4 amazing months. And I hope you have a beautiful day celebrating today. Happy birthday. We got MJ Powell says, Rob, President Trump will be in Prescott on Sunday. Amazing. Good morning, watchers. Happy Thursday. Somebody mentioned that yesterday. I think Prescott Valley. Is that right? Hey, and Chris, Solitary One, brought in 5 new membos. Thank you, Chris. And welcome aboard, new membo friends. How amazing is that? We got new membos. Sadie is over on Local, says, I missed my first total live stream last evening. I went to see Garrett Ziegler. He was in downtown Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Room was almost filled with lots of Wisconsin people driving long distances and some locals. A new theory or fact, they think it was Ashley's cocaine, as she's been in and out of rehab a lot more than Hunter. Yes, I have photos. Hey, look at this. It's Sadie and Garrett. What a great photo. Man, we love Garrett. He's awesome. And here's Garrett. Dropping brilliance. Shout out to our friend Garrett Ziegler. Dropping brilliance on the corrupt Biden family and our disgusting deep state. What's going on? His name is Robert Paulson, says, hey, Rob, I was watching a movie, Primal Fear, the other day. Had me thinking about other lawyer-based movies like The Lincoln Lawyer, A Few Good Men, My Cousin Vinny. Anyways, I was wondering if there's any lawyer-based movies from your childhood that maybe influenced you into becoming a lawyer. or fueled your love of law? No, I don't think so. I wasn't actually as interested in the lawyer part of it as I was in the law. Does that make sense? So like, I'm not, yeah, I was more in, I think the law, I was enamored. I fell in love with the law when I took a constitutional law class in college on a total whim. I like needed to fill the class up. And I'm like, I was a political science major. I took a constitutional law class. I really didn't know. I love the Constitution, but I didn't understand the law or the mechanics of the law. And I have no law in my family. I never had any exposure to law, no lawyers or anything like that. So I took constitutional law. I'm like, Constitution is pretty awesome. I guess it'd be cool to take a class. And then I saw how it worked, and I'm like, this is awesome. Like it felt really intuitive. It felt logical, and then that's really what inspired me. It was kind of on a whim. And a lot of the lawyer movies, I mean, I like to watch them, I guess, but I'm not too into them. Yeah. But it's a great question. Yeah, it's a great question. Anyways, love your show. Watch the community and watch your community. We have a great community, the best. You literally keep me awake on my ridiculous commute through LA traffic every morning and evening. Wow, that's awesome. We're really glad to have you to join you on that. I know what that is, man. I know what that feels like. It's really an honor. And I did that when I used to clean swimming pools, drive around. I'd clean like 20 pools in a day, and I'd listen to talk radio all day from like 5 in the morning till 5 at night all day. And it's a real privilege to be able to share that time with you. So thank you for that. His name is Robert Paulson. What's going on? The Veil says, good morning, Rob. At the end of the debate, did they cut Miss Lake off when she was supposed to do her closing? It's a good question, The Veil. I'm not sure. Did they? I didn't catch that. But it could have been something that happened. I'm not sure. Hey, and what's up? We had this one from Lady Ice. Lady Ice shared this one over on Locals. And then, my friends, we're going to wrap it up because I got to scoot out the door today. But Lady Ice shared this one. Says, I've been a mortgage specialist for over 20 years. The only way that guy can get a VA loan or any mortgage while still owning a house is to A, have proof that his home is under contract to be sold or will be sold, or B, prove that he has tenants renting the other house, usually by rent checks, both of which would be in conflict as a senator for Arizona. So, which lie did he tell? He produced fake documents to back it up or to get the loan? Good question. Good questions. Good questions. Yeah, all good questions. I don't know, Lady Ice. But a corrupt congressperson? You're kidding. Yeah, I believe that that's probably true. All right, so my friends, we are going to leave it there on the day. Thank you for joining us early. The plan is we're out of pocket the rest of the day. Membos, if there's something interesting happening at this event, maybe I'll post an update from there over lunch or during our evening break. But we're going to have a nice event today, and then we're going to have a nice dinner and cocktails that everyone else will partake in. But it's going to be great. It's going to be a fun day. We'll call it a day here, but tomorrow we'll be back. Members stream in the morning. Tomorrow it's going to be Friday. My goodness, how did it come so quickly on Friday? It's already here. Wow. All right. But it's going to be a great Friday. So we're going to do a Membo stream tomorrow, and then we'll be back with the full show, regular time and place tomorrow. And my friends, I cannot wait to get into it with you then. And so I hope that you're out there on this beautiful Thursday accomplishing all the things you've set your mind to. We will be back here tomorrow to get into it again, my friends. And when we do that, we're going to need to see you right back here so that together, with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Make it a beautiful day, my friends. A beautiful evening. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.